Hey everyone, it's Michael GoosebumpsFan. Today I'm going to be doing a video about a thing like Goosebumps. I recently reread for like the 5th time in like the last 2 years, I think. Something like that. A book series that I love to death. It's actually just a trilogy. It's written by Alvin Schwartz, and the good illustrations, the original edition of the books, is done by Stephen Gammell, not the Brian Helquist updated art from like 2010 that just was completely watered down and it wasn't scary or anything. If you love scary stories, I think you'll love these story collections, these 3 books. But mainly I'm going to be talking about the first one for this video, and I'll do 2 more videos on the next 2 books. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. This is the Big Treasury, is what it used to be called. Collected hardcover of all 3 books into one. And these are scary stories for teenagers, children. They're really short stories. They're like 3 to 5 pages a lot of the time. A big chunk of them, especially in this first book, are maybe a page and a half. Maybe. And they are so effective. This is a book series that started in the 80s, before Goosebumps, of course. And the thing with this is that the 3rd book came out in the 90s, but it seems to me like these had such a huge impact on a lot of people, a lot of the time because of the illustrations more so than the actual stories. In my opinion, Alvin Schwartz is my biggest influence as a writer currently in my life, and I would argue that his very short storytelling narrative, the way he does these things, it is so fantastic, and it's only improved by the amazing, scary artwork from Stephen Gammell. I want to show you some of these art pieces and how frightening these things were to many of us when we were kids. This is from one of my favorite stories in the book called The Haunted House. Look at this freaking picture. And you tell me if you've never seen this before, if this does not give you nightmares, and will probably scare your kids, more than likely. There are some really scary art and illustrations and whatnot in this. And it completes what Alvin Schwartz starts with the book. I'm a big Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark collector. I have bought so many things recently for this old book series and the newer things. Of course, they had a movie in 2019, and it was fantastic. I love that as well. I really hope we get sequels. At least one, you know? And I hope it's as good. Guillermo del Toro worked on that, of course, the Hellboy guy. And he did great. I think he did a really good job with most of the production behind that film, even though he wasn't the director. He did really good with that film, and the director himself did a fantastic job. The actors were great. The younger teenager actors were fantastic. I've done a review for that film here on the channel, in case you'd like to check it out and see what I have to say about it. It's kind of in that vein of just urban legends and myths, you know? But the thing is, a lot of this is collected in the best possible way. Some of these stories are straight up retellings of old scary stories, like The Hook, for example. If you ever heard the story about The Hook, I was a kid in the 90s, and a lot of the time you would see shows do almost like their own spin on The Hook story, and it was creepy. Hey Arnold did a lot of stuff like that. Hey Arnold constantly hit on a lot of urban legend feel-in tales. I've done all those videos about those episodes. I love this kind of stuff. This was the kind of stuff I ate up when I was a kid. It's my biggest interest nowadays, is hearing urban legends and myths from different areas and whatnot in the US, outside of the US, all kinds of things. Here on YouTube, if you want some really scary, creepy content to watch or listen to, there's a thing called Reddit videos, and a lot of people just take like this robot voice off the internet and narrate posts from Reddit that talk about people's scariest unexplained experiences and whatnot like that. I have a huge infatuation with videos like that. If you love Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark and you want more content, you should look at something like that here on YouTube, or Reddit, for example, where those videos are being made from here on YouTube. It's great content. If you love stuff like that, if you love these creepy, just random stories of things that happen to people, these stories feel a lot like these Scary Stories books from Alvin Schwartz. But for the most part, the biggest problem I have with all of these stories in here, not all of them, but a big chunk of this book at one point towards the end of the book, tries to go more comedy-based and trying not to scare people so bad. And I kind of get it, having the levity to not scare kids entirely. But honest to God, if they make it through so many stories in here like the Wendigo is such a good story. I'll talk about that more in a little bit. But if you can make it through the Haunted House and the Wendigo stories and The Thing, if you've read The Thing in here, that art alone was really petrifying. If you can make it through those kinds of stories and get to the last section of the book, even though these books are basically about 100 pages, maybe 80 pages even at a time, if you can even make it to the last section of the book, why would you even want the comedy part? It makes more sense to me to put that in the front, you know, but it wouldn't be the best note to start the book off of. And they have some good stories in here, even in the comedy section, which really don't work for me. It kind of ruins what the book was really doing. But there's some bizarre stories in here, like the first story in here is called The Big Toe. That was the first Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark book ever, about a guy finding a big old toe out in his garden, and he takes it home and they try to eat it, and then later on he starts hearing somebody walking around the house, you know, saying, "Where's my toe?" and stuff like that. It sounds dumb, it works really well, because a lot of the first part of this book are jump scare stories for campfire tales. If you want to have a campfire outside with your kids and you want to scare them, read some of the stories out of here or memorize them, because they're short. And at the end of the stories, pretty much all of them, you scream in people's faces to try to compliment the finale of the tale, to try to scare people. And it works. It works really well. I haven't done it myself, but I feel like it would work if I was out by a campfire and heard some of these stories and had heard them for the first time, even. I think it would have worked tremendously well. There are so many good stories in here, and again, the illustrations are what make these books even better. Again, I've bought so many Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark things. I do book hauls every once in a while for things I've bought from this franchise, this series, over the years. In recent times, where I've bought them in the last couple of months. Because I decided to collect this on the side from my Goosebumps collection. And I love them. I've read, again, since I had my back injury back in 2018, I have read all three of these books back to back over and over and over again, like 5 times in the last couple of years. It's now 2020, and I can honestly say, as much as I love Goosebumps, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark does not have that comedy and that tone that characters typically speak with in the Goosebumps books. It doesn't have that typical comedic style to it. It's a very dry tale, but in the best possible way, the way it's told. It is just spooky. There's not an extra word there that needs to be there. Everything hits in the exact way it needs to, and it's creepy stuff, man. I love it to death. I love everything from the urban legend stuff to the just straight up scary stories like the Wendigo. The Wendigo gets me really bad. It's one of the stories I mentioned earlier. The Wendigo is a story about a guy who goes out hunting, and he takes an Indian with him who knows the area pretty well. They go out into the middle of the woods, and they hear this horrific noise, just this wind blowing really hard, making like voices almost, they think they start to hear. The Indian goes into the corner of the tent that they're staying in and starts kind of freaking out and shaking and stuff. And like the main guy that's the hunter out there, when he opens up the tent, there's like no wind blowing at all out there, but they're still hearing it and they don't know where it's coming from. And of course, if you've never heard anything about a Wendigo legend before, there's some really spooky stuff out there, especially when you look online, like the Reddit videos I was talking about people talking about Wendigos and skinwalkers and stuff like that. Really spooky stuff to talk about and to really look into if you love urban legend type stuff, which is a big thing I'm obsessed with. I love that stuff. It's just fascinating to me. Whether it's true or false, it's fantastic to listen to and look into. But Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark has things like that, which I didn't even spoil the ending of that book. That Wendigo story, it's like 5 or 6 pages long, and it's fantastic. One of my other favorites I talked about, too, was The Haunted House. The Haunted House is a story basically about a preacher, and this is the weird thing. A lot of these 3 books have moments that talk about the Bible in a positive light. They talk about preachers in a positive light, and that's weird to me as a Christian, because I don't see that almost ever at all in any media nowadays, even in kids' entertainment. But there's a preacher that goes into an old haunted house. He decides to exorcise the demons out of it. And he goes in there and he hangs out at nighttime, really late at night, reading his Bible in the dark, pretty much. And he starts hearing somebody coming up the stairs. And the story just, it starts taking your breath away, man. By the time you get to that art picture I showed you earlier of the zombie-looking lady, you've already been so spooked by the end of that book, or that story, that's about 5 or 6 pages long, like I said. By the time you get to the end of that story, you don't really know how to feel. It's just the most unnerving feeling you could possibly have reading that story. I don't know. I love it to death. I think the book just shines immensely well on that. I'm going to look through for some of the other stories in here through the table of contents. Let's see. There was another song I had looked at for a long time. I've been trying to find whatever it was for many, many, many years. And when I read this in 2018, I finally found the song that my music teacher, Miss Jensen, yes, I remember my music teacher from elementary school's name, Miss Jensen, played this really creepy song for us when we were kids. I remember we loved it around Halloween. Halloween was just amazing in the 1990s. It was better than the 80s, the 70s, all of that stuff. It was, I wasn't alive in those times, but it was amazing in the 90s. I have these amazing, incredible memories of a time where people actually celebrated Halloween, and they don't anymore where I live. It's kind of sad. But there's a song in here that is really spooky called Old Woman All Skin and Bones. And it's, when I found out, reading the song and seeing the little, because they have like illustrations and they have the actual bars for the music itself, when I was reading that, I was like, this is the song. This is the song I was always hearing when I was a kid that frightened me so bad, you know, from Miss Jensen. It was just amazing. I loved it so much. So that's in here, in the first section of the book. There's also a song, or a video, not a video, there's a story in the beginning of this book also from the scary jump scare stuff called Me Tai Dodie Walker, which was utilized very well in the movie. And I love the Me Tai Dodie Walker story. I think it works so well. Very, very spooky. Very creepy. Probably not for kids. It's good stuff, man. I love it. Let's see. I'm just kind of browsing through really quick to find some different things that I want to talk about. After the Wendigo story in the third chapter of the book, there's a story in here called The Dead Man's Brains. It's not really a story per se, but it kind of is. It's this really cool thing I've never heard of anybody doing, where you would sit in a very dimly lit room, kind of a darker looking room, around Halloween time if you wanted to, or for like a birthday party to spook kids, and you would like do things like, for example, you would have a bowl that would have 2 grapes in it, but they'd be peeled. And when you passed around the room, you'd be telling this creepy story you'd probably be better off to memorize because it would make it even more effective. But when you're passing around the bowl, you tell the kids to feel what's inside of the bowl, and they'll pick up the 2 little, like the peeled grapes, and you'll tell them that's the guy's eyeballs that was murdered in the story that you're telling them. And I know it sounds horrific to people who are probably parents or other Christians and stuff, but I cannot imagine what it would have been like to have been a kid and experience that story being told to me in like elementary school or something. It is such a spooky, the way the story is told, it's kind of like in a weird nursery rhyme type way, but the different ideas for how to spook kids about like, hey, here's this man's beating heart, here's this, here's that, here's his blood might be like tomato soup or ketchup or something in a bowl. It's really spooky, dude. I mean, I thought it was a really cool idea for this, and I love the picture. It's really creepy, too. I'm not going to show it to you, so I don't want to spoil the whole thing for you. But I recommend this book alone on illustrations, but the stories themselves and the ideas for how to spook kids a little bit, whether it be your kids or somebody else's kids, look amazing. They look so great. They look like they just be fun, you know? Let's see. The Girl Who Stood in the Grave is a really good story. I really like that a whole lot. May I Carry Your Basket is the end of the third section of the book, and that's a really freaky story about a guy encountering a woman on the side of the road at nighttime. Basically tells her, like, hey, can I help you carry your basket to your house or wherever you're going? And she says, sure, and then this whole thing happens, and it's petrifying. I love it to death, though. The Other Dangers section of the book, which is the fourth section of the book, is the urban legend type stuff I was talking about, like The Hook and The White Satin Evening Gown, which is a really good one. High Beams is a really good one. The Babysitter is another really good one, too. It's kind of, if you've ever seen the films called When a Stranger Calls, it's based on the old urban legend about the babysitter, and the babysitter story is in here. I thought that was pretty cool. Again, about a page or 2 long. Works just as scary now as it ever was, especially if you put your mindset in the frame of the 1980s. It works even better. No caller ID. If anybody doesn't understand what I'm talking about, read the story. Read the story, think about it a little bit. Or watch the films. The films are pretty good. At least the remake was. I thought the remake was good. I saw that in theaters when I was a kid, too. Let's see. Aaron Kelly's Bones is in the humorous section of the book. And I would argue it's a creepier story. Basically, this guy dies. His wife is trying to get into a romantic relationship with another person. And he comes back, and he's not going to let her have that. And he tries to spook off that guy. And he likes to dance, and the picture's terrifying, and just Aaron Kelly's Bones is a really, really good story. The story that ended this book is The Ghost with the Bloody Fingers, and that story got to me so bad about people renting a hotel room, and inside of that closet in that hotel room, every night when the people would stay in that hotel, a ghost would come out, and it would have bleeding fingers. And I don't know what it is about just the phrase of that. It's not even so much how the story is told, just the imagery alone for a lot of these tales is what makes them so frightening for me. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is such an effective book series, an effective collection of tales. Sometimes you can read stories in this first book and see them almost tinkered and readapted, very much like many cultures retelling the stories over and over time, because Alvin Schwartz studied these things, because he was obsessed with urban legends just like how I am. You can see him almost retinker different ideas from like this first book in future books to almost be a retelling. In this book alone, they have certain stories like When Martin Comes. That's kind of a change-up story from some earlier things like The Haunted House and different stories in here that I like tremendously, or love tremendously. I think Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is almost perfect. I wish it had not had that humor section. It's not really humorous because some of the stories are actually scary, like the Bloody Finger story or the Aaron Kelly's Bones story. But I don't want to completely slant it and say it's not perfect. To me, it is a fantastic book series. All three of books are extremely powerful, have some amazing powerhouse stories in here. I'm sure there's some stories, even though I just reread this again for the 5th time in like the last 2 years, I'm sure there are stories that I forgot to mention in here when I was talking about it just now. There's some great things in here, just random stories like alligators that are creepy. Not just based around alligators, some really just weird, bizarre tales and urban legend type thing is really what I want to hit on with this, because that's a lot of these type of stories. It works so well with the art, and I just love what Stephen Gammell and Alvin Schwartz came together and did with this. They made such a legendary book series that has scared people to death. Even when I was a kid, again, I did not grow up on these. I had a cousin, well, 2 cousins, who owned, I think, the 3rd book. No, it was the 1st book, actually. It was the original copy with the clown face. I own that now. And they had told me about how spooky the art was. I remember going through the books and seeing things like the haunted house story when I was a kid. The Wendigo art, I love that as well. Just the tracks in the snow, you know. Stephen Gammell's art is just amazing. It's like a mixture of sketch with like blotchy artwork, and it just works amazingly well at times, depending on what we're talking about. I don't know how he did it. I wish I could do art like that. You don't see any artists that are able to pull that kind of thing off, and the man is a legend because of what he did here. But anyway, guys, I love this book. I think it's fantastic. I love this whole book, all 3 of the books together. I think they are fantastic, amazing books. Some things I would recommend almost more than I recommend most of Goosebumps, for that matter, as much as my whole channel is focused around that, as much as I love R.L. Stine and love Goosebumps. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, the first book, if I had to rate this on a 5-star basis, I would easily give this a 5 out of 5 stars. You might as well be prepared, because the future books are probably going to have that same rating the more I think about it. I love all 3 of the books. I would recommend, if you want a good testing of this, you could probably go to the library and rent out those books at some point whenever they open back up. But this first book is really the best place to start. You can read them in any order you want, because they're all standalone books with many different short stories in them. None of them reference previous stories. But I recommend just reading them all the way through. They're very much a 1980s, 1990s type of scary, scary stories to tell. They work so well. They work up to this day in 2020, all these years later, and it's just amazing how well they've aged, the way Alvin Schwartz told these stories, or retold them for that matter. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this first book? Do you love it? Do you hate it? My next 2 videos will probably be a lot shorter compared to this first video, just because I don't really have as much to say about those, because I've said everything I want to say about the series in this particular video right now. But anyway, what are your thoughts on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark? What would you rate this book? What, do you love it? Did you grow up on it? Are you like me and saw it much more later on when you were an adult? I love that I got to read these in a time where I was very vulnerable in my life. I read these for the first time at nighttime. I think I read a book a night, and it was really late every single night when I would read the books, and I was obsessed when I read these for the first time a couple of years ago. They are amazing. Anyway, what are your thoughts, guys? Put them down below. Thank you for watching. May the Lord Jesus Christ bless you guys today, and goodbye.